So I've pulled together, I guess, a bit of an overview on the biodiversity values of the pumice stone. And I guess when going through them, there were so many to report on. So I have really just focused on the terrestrial values mostly. And I guess looking at the biodiversity and nature conservation, I always like to refer to the Regional Nature Conservation Strategy back in 2003. It's sort of been and gone now, but I like the definition that it provided. And it looked at those different communities, the interaction between the plants, the animals, the microorganisms, the ecosystems, but also it recognised the traditional owners and the ecological and the biodiversity values, the cultural values that are sort of intertwined. So as Ben mentioned, I'll also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of country and pay my respects to the elders past, present and future. I'll touch on those four components of biodiversity, but as mentioned, as a high level, so looking at the regional diversity, ecosystem diversity, species diversity, and genetic diversity. And I guess this is being driven by the SEQ Natural Resource Management Plan. So we're currently reviewing that, and there's a workshop tomorrow that will go into more detail, but focusing on that nature conservation theme and the targets that are listed in that plan. So is it a biodiversity hotspot? This was a term probably flagged 10 years ago, and I think it is. It picks up on those international values, that Ramsar wetland that we probably heard from about yesterday, but also those nationally threatened ecosystems, the salt marsh, the vine forests, the fish habitat areas, the marine parks. We've got some largest tracts in the sub-region, so those large forests. This one's that open forest woodland. We've got special biodiversity values. We've got those coastal values, those heaths and wallums, right up to the montane heath and the rainforests. We've got corridors, and we're going to hear from others today, Richard and other colleagues, about those corridors. And high species diversity. Looking at the average across SEQ, pumice stone is above average, so 177 species sort of per 25 kilometres squared on average of species diversity. So it's pretty special. It's a rich area. So what makes it important and rich? Well, it is those forests, the pumice stone forests. Up to 64% of the region is forested, but that does include the remnant forest, the sort of the original old growth forests, but also the woody veg. And we know that a large component of the pumice stone is state forest. So there's over 30% probably within that state forest estate. But overall 64% of the area is forested. And we need to maintain that percentage as best we can. And certainly the remnant forest, I think when we first looked at the pumice stone action plan, it was around that 31%. Up to 10 years ago. So we haven't gone too far back. And you can see there the change since 2001 was just under 500 hectares. And some of those forests, I guess we call sort of locally, regionally significant forests. And I touched on them earlier there, those coastal communities, the salt marsh, the mangroves, important fish habitat areas. We've got our heathlands, our coastal heaths, but also the montane heaths, those, I guess, those mountains, and very important for some of our invertebrates, the butterflies and species. Wallums throughout that lower section of the pumice stone, and also our rainforests. We do have, I guess, those vine forests, those dry rainforests, which border mostly the creek lines these days. And how big are those forests and connected? I guess that is a challenge driving up from Brisbane today. I guess, we not only do we have land use change that's continuing across southeast Queensland, but it's that infrastructure, those road upgrades, the power easements, the expansion, that also dissects our forests. and very few fauna crossings, I guess, you know, when you come up that Bruce Highway. So there's opportunities there to make sure that, I guess, our critters, our fauna can travel east-west, but also north-south. But you can see Bribie, I guess, as a standout. That Bribie Island forest is the biggest forest tract in the Pumicestone. But we've also got some large forests, I guess, associated with the Glasshouse Mountains, those peaks, up to 5,000 hectares in size. But what we often see is we see those larger tracts getting sort of nibbled away and sort of edge effects and dissected, and we end up getting more in those lower categories. And you can see, you know, 437 in those smaller tracts, those 1 to 20 hectare forests. And this, I guess, is a management issue. But fortunately, we'll hear from other speakers today about, I guess, private land conservation that look at, well, how do we connect some of these landscapes up, not only through the public estate, but through private land sort of partnerships. Wetlands, sorry if this one, I think it should be okay to see, but yeah, just looking at our wetlands, I guess we may have heard more about wetlands yesterday, but I guess our freshwater, our palustrine wetlands, our estuarine wetlands, and across SEQ, the old freshwater wetlands aren't doing too good. 8 out of 18 catchments have supported 30% or more of their freshwater wetland extent. Pumicestone's one of them, but you can see, let me see if I can get this working. It's getting close. Pumicestone, this is the catchment itself, the terrestrial, the land. The passage is, I guess, the actual north-south passage. And then we've got the Bribie Island extents, and this is all available on the Wetland Info DES site. But you can see that 32%, I guess we need to maintain that above 30. The riverine isn't doing too bad either. And the estuarine, the mangroves, those salt marshes, they love this wet and dry. So they're often, you know, 80 to 90% of the original extent. But we're hopeful that we can do some freshwater wetland programs over the next, you know, 3 years, I guess, 3 to 5 years, just to maintain what we've got and hopefully expand it. Vulnerable ecosystems. So I guess when we talk about vulnerable ecosystems, those forests, they're vulnerable because of clearing or land use change, but also are they represented in a protected area, a national park or council reserve for the future? So we often aim for about 4% of all ecosystems to be within a protected area. And you can see there is a suite there of endangered and poorly conserved regional ecosystems. So pink on the map, pink and purple. So there's still room, I guess, to continue to look at, I guess, that public land estate and expansion, but also picking up on that private land partnership program that also plays a role in protecting those ecosystems. So there's a range there from it's the vine forests that have been, I guess, disturbed over the time. We've got woodlands. There's a whole range of eucalyptus forests, scribbly gums, those old scribbly gums with the large hollows that support our arboreal mammals. The Melaleuca paperbarks, they're up there too as being endangered and not well represented in our estates. And there's also, I guess, that breadth of native species across the Pumicestone region. So I've just pulled out, I guess, those threatened species. And some of them, you know, the koala, Mount Emu, she-oak, some of our shorebirds are listed up there, flying fox, black-breasted button quail, and a lot of these are also associated with some of those vulnerable ecosystems. So as we start to lose some of those forests, we're also losing the population of our species. They might not go extinct, but the numbers go down, and I guess make them very vulnerable for any changes, climate change, weeds, fire. And we're seeing that firsthand in the Pumicestone region, some of those threats and pressures. Overall, a lot of the remnant forests you can see there, the threatened species habitat for priority species is supporting, our rare and endangered species. And it's often considered state significance. So it is picked up, through, planning instruments like Shaping SEQ, the regional plan, as matters of state environmental significance. And I touched on the public estate. When we talk about green space, it does include those publicly accessible areas, the beaches, the forests, the waterways, national parks, reserves. Palmerston has 51% green space, but keeping in mind that does include the state forest, and we're seeing some land use changes there, certainly in the north. And I'm not sure if you can see it on the map there, but in the latest iteration of Shaping SEQ, we did have a new regional development area there, BUR East, and it is picking up on that state forest area as it's in transition from plantation to maybe a different land use, but that has to go through that planning process to see what is the best use of that land. So we're hopeful that that 51%, can I go back here? That one there, can be maintained, because as more people come into the region, they want to access open space, those public areas. Otherwise you go down to the passage and you're sharing it with a lot of people, and this also puts pressure on our biodiversity and nature conservation. So looking at that last update since 2011, we have had some additions through the Council Reserves Program, both Moreton Bay Regional Council and Sunshine Coast Council, and a new protected or expansion to the protected area. So I think that's associated with the Palmerston National Park. So it's good to see those additions being made. And we're missing programs at that national scale where we used to have the National Reserve System that used to support councils in the state to value add to our states. So it's really coming back to the region and to the local councils to almost have to do it themselves. Touched on a few of the threats there, and a lot of the people in the room today would be more aware of them than me, would see them firsthand, but certainly that ongoing land use change. How do we, identify land suitable and capable for its purpose? Residential, farming, industry, and also nature conservation. We saw some major breakthroughs with the coastal erosion there on Bribie, so we're seeing firsthand this climate change or changing climates, and I tried to get an image there of that top end of Bribie, but I don't think it's picking it up. This one was from October, and I think over Christmas it did break through that top end. But I'm assuming that it's somewhere in this area here where that storm surge did break through there. Pests and weeds, they're ongoing, but a lot of council and private landholders tackling them. But again, it's just as we tackle them, more come in. They love that subtropical climate. We also experienced probably one of our hottest summers and driest in 2019. And Bribie, unfortunately, did have a bushfire there, and you can see up to 2,800 hectares were affected. We're getting some good intel on mapping now to actually be able to... I'll go back. To map that proper extent so we can actually see, how intense some of that fire was and what was affected, both forests and species. And we're very close to negotiating, with the Australian government for fire recovery. Ben stood up, so I think I'm just about there. There's a lot happening, and we, over the 3 days, we'll probably share some of the responses, but there's just a real snapshot there about cultural fire management, and I think it's needed after the 2019. We've got shellfish habitat restoration, foreshore rehab, all stuff that's, trying to combat some of those pressures and protect our biodiversity.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ben.
We've probably got time for one question. Thank you, Shannon. So 4% of each ecosystem being protected seems an unacceptably low target given international targets and norms. Is there an appetite to increase this value?
Yeah, it is funny. I guess when we first looked at that poorly conserved target, we assessed 4, 10 and 15%. And what we found is some ecosystems weren't at that 4% target. So we had to go right back to 4%. But some are at that 15%. So I guess when we think about 4%, it's probably some of those blue gum forests on sort of the floodplains that are probably only 2% left. So we have to actually restore that landscape to even get them up to 4%. So I think that the short answer is would always love more forests in a protected area, both private and public land conservation. But unfortunately, not all ecosystems are there yet.
Thanks, Shannon. Thanks, Shannon, again.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.